So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Trans Mike. My name is Amara Jones, and I am the host of Trans Mike, a Twitter Spaces where we talk about just topical things that are trending on Twitter or in various conversations that impact TGNC people. And it can be anything from popular culture. We've discussed how The Matrix is a trans allegory here, to what is happening with regards to Dave Chappelle. And then today, now a topic that should receive more attention and will from our conversation today, and that is the mental health of trans youth, particularly in this moment. If you are not familiar with my work, I am the founder and CEO of an organization called Translash Media, where we work to center the stories of trans people using the power of journalism and personal narrative to humanize and to expand space for us in culture and beyond. I have a podcast called the Translash Podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks. We are back for our first show of 2022. Actually, today, it is a conversation about the 1 year mark of the Biden administration and what it means for our communities. So, if you don't subscribe to the Translash Podcast, I encourage you to do so. This was a really powerful conversation with Farai Chideya, a really powerful queer political journalist, and Maureen Turner, who is the first non-binary and Muslim member of the Oklahoma State House, for a conversation about what it is like to be someone who is TGNC, of color, and Muslim at ground zero over the last year. And it probably gives about is a good account as anything as what it's like in the states across the country for us over this last year. So right now, I would like to say hello and invite Orion Rumler, who is a reporter at 19th News. Also a fellow Georgia native like me, to come into the room. They are the reason why we're here today to discuss their article in the 19th earlier this month, how anti-trans bills hurt mental health for two-thirds of LGBTQ plus youth. Orion, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much, Amara. Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties before, but thanks so much for having me.
That's okay. That's okay. I am so glad that you are here. One, because it's actually, I think, been a year since we spoke, and it was because your now colleague, not then colleague, Kate Sasson at 19 News, and I were all on NPR talking about what it was like to be a trans journalist at this moment. I can't believe that, one, that was a year ago, and two, that it's been that long since we've actually spoken.
I know it doesn't feel like a year ago, and it's yeah, I feel like I still don't have a good way to process or verbalize how it feels to be a trans reporter at this moment. Like still it's been a year and I still don't know how to like explain it. I guess just focusing on the reporting is all I can do, really.
Yeah, well, you've been doing that. Yesterday I was on with your editor at large, Erin, on another show, and she sang your praises to high heaven. So whatever reporting you're doing over there is good and is making a difference. So keep it up. Um, I,
Thank you.
of course, of course. So I wanted to talk to you about this. This is an article that you wrote earlier this month. It caught my attention and the attention of my entire team. 19th News just joined the room, and you all miss me singing the praises of Orion and also Erin, your editor at large. So I just wanted to reiterate that we just did that right before you came on. But Orion, this article caught my attention, the attention of our team, because, as you know, we spent a good part of last year reporting on what we call the anti-trans hate machine for a specific series that we did, a limited podcast series called the Anti-Trans Hate Machine: A Plot Against Equality, which sort of did a deep dive into the forces behind the 127 bills in nearly 40 states that were introduced last year, kind of the money, the people, the religious ideology, the organization, kind of all of that. Um, and so it's one of the things that we're attuned to. We're actually going to do a second season this year looking at kind of cultural landscapes of the same. But this caught our attention because it's a different perspective on what is actually happening, because we tend to think about these things as political discussions, or we think of them as like high level, as high level policy discussions, and it's all happening at a very exalted and contained way. But you spoke about the ways in which this conversation is toxic for LGBTQ youth. Can you just go into that a little bit?
Definitely. Thank you so much for talking about this. So the Trevor Project Morning Consult found that two-thirds of LGBTQ youth that they talked to last fall, that they surveyed last fall, around 13 to 24, they said debates around the anti-trans bills last year negatively affected their mental health. And I thought the data was unique because it directly asked kids at a national level, like, are these bills harming your health? And the Trevor Project had done this with Texas before, but this is the first survey I'd seen so far that had like made a direct link. Because we know advocates have been worried about the mental health effects, the negative mental health effects since like last year, since bills first started happening. They were like, we're worried how this will affect kids, but we didn't have data to talk about it yet. So the data was unique for that reason. And I also agree with you that I think it's important to have this perspective on it because something else advocates have been saying, since last year is like these bills, we think they're going to negatively affect kids even if they don't pass, which I think, is also part of the discussion about mental health because we know from research, like even if you're anticipating being discriminated against, that can affect your mental health. Like if you see someone else being discriminated against, like that affects your mental health. So I really think this is a great way to talk about like the bigger picture of these bills beyond like, how many are passing, where are they passing, which is important too.
And I think that the one of the interesting things is how young the impact, or how at such a young age the impact can be. Because the youngest who were surveyed were 13, um, and that means that young people who may not be particularly politically inclined, or in other ways engaged in kind of a process that we don't think about. Most young people don't pay attention until they're adults. That something about this conversation is filtering down to them in a way that is particularly harmful. And I'm wondering if that struck you as well, and if any of the people that you spoke to kind of had insights about how this impact can impact the youngest of the young.
And I definitely thank you for pointing that out because the something else the Morning Consult and Trevor Project found was like kids are paying attention to this, like LGBTQ kids and especially trans kids are paying attention to trans bills. Like they're watching out for this. And the researchers and the advocates I talked to, they had like a mixed response to that. They're glad that kids are paying attention. Like they want kids to be like politically mindful, like knowing what's going on in their community, but they're also worried that like an overexposure to like news about these bills could have a negative effect. Like they don't want kids to like freak out, like they don't want to cause like a lot of stress, like of a bunch of headlines being like, oh, like the all these bills are happening. Um, but I think the way we can approach that as journalists is to think about like how can we be sure to contextualize like how many of these bills have actually passed, which is not that many. Like, of course, it's important to say that some have passed, but we should like when we're talking about these bills, we should take pains to say that not all of these are passing. Like, here are all the legal issues that are coming up for these bills. Um, so if that answers your question, like advocates are glad the kids are engaged, but they're worried about um, like an overexposure to news, like about kids assuming the worst and kind of internalizing like the negative feelings that proponents of these bills are sharing.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And I also think, though, that as I asked the question and was listening to your response, it brought up a conversation that I had with a state legislator in South Carolina last year as a part of the work that we did on the anti trans hate machine. podcast last year, and it reminds me that he told me that in part they thought that the conversation around these bills was the win, that they think that just having a conversation about whether or not trans people are legitimate and whether or not trans youth should be able to access medical health care. This just came back to me. How he said, this is a part of our goal, is just to have this conversation. And he said, I think the quote is that we'll have this conversation and things will move regardless of the vote. Right. Like, so there is um, a strategy here that they do have that is designed to move this conversation into the broader culture and to have an impact on people. And I'm just wondering if that's something that you've come across in your reporting as well, if you heard about. But I just remember him saying that to me last year.
That's really striking. Wow, I'm going to be processing that for a little bit. But that does make me think of what uh, researchers and advocates have been saying for a while. Like they're worried about mental health, but they also see, like when we talk about mental health, like with the bills that are coming out more this year about curriculums, that are, especially the Florida bill that's been labeled the Don't Say Gay bill. Um, like we're worried that kids will interpret that as um, like I shouldn't be myself at school. Like I'm
Hmm.
gonna internalize this. Like I'm not gonna be out, and so that that affects mental health. But that's also just telling someone not to be their full self. And I think that is part of why some advocates say like this is telling LGBTQ kids like not to exist because it's saying like it because it could encourage some of them to just not be out as themselves. And when you're talking about the conversation around these bills, um, that's striking that that lawmaker told you that that's part of the win because the rhetoric around these bills is what advocates have been worried about like this whole time. Like, of course, they care about whether these bills pass, but like the entire conversation around them is like a minefield to them of like what are we exposing kids to? Like we want to fight these bills, but we don't want to overexpose them to like all this rhetoric.
Yeah, and I think that it's something that we have to be really cognizant of moving forward because, as we know, in addition to these bills, last year, kind of the right road tested how these issues may play out in school board races and in issues around schools and parental choice, in quotes. In Virginia, there is this very famous, it was this kind of this sub campaign whereby someone who detractors said identified as trans. I don't believe that the kid actually did, who was assigned male at birth and entered a girl's bathroom, did end up, I believe, sexually assaulting one of the people who were in there. And it's this case that just is kind of a total outlier, but it was seized upon and they used it as a way to say, okay, this is what's going to happen across the country. And so I think that we're going to hear much more about, schools and bathroom access and all these other things, particularly as we move into this election year. And so I think that that's going to add to the pressure that kids face, and is something that we just ought to be mindful of. And I'm wondering if, in some of your early thinking about 2022, are you looking at how these issues are playing out in schools or in, school board races or races for superintendent or that piece of this?
No, definitely, and that's part of what I was so excited to talk about this. The story I'm working on now for anti-trans bills is focused on the curriculum bills that we're seeing because I talked with
Hmm.
the HRC and the Freedom for All Americans because Freedom for All Americans, they've both been tracking this, and the ACLU has their tracker right now. They're updating it weekly. I know at some point last year they were doing like just monthly updates, but now it's weekly again. Um, and but anyway, that's all to say. The curriculum bills are what I'm focused on right now because
Hmm.
these orgs are saying like we're seeing more of these bills specifically, although we're seeing more of all of them. We're seeing more that are about curriculums that are school based that are not about just athletics or just about bathrooms. It's bills that's like one in Arizona, I believe, that's you need a parent's permission to join a GSA, and there's another bill, I think in New Jersey, that is like if a parent has an issue with how a school is teaching, like if it's exposing a kid to discussion about, a sexual orientation or gender identity, you can get a voucher to pull that kid out of public school, find a private school to take them to. So the curriculum bills are what I'm focused on right now. And I appreciate how you phrased it about planning for this year, because we have been talking at the 19th about how to how to push forward this coverage in a way that's not just like here's the number of bills, because
Hmm.
it's totally important that there's so many. But I do want to focus on what's new, especially with the curriculum ones, because I also see it as related. Like, last year we were also seeing some school districts across a few states, like Oregon and Missouri and Utah and Florida, going for the pride flag bans.
Hmm.
And we also saw some schools going for the book bans, and those are also school based. So that's where I'm looking at the most for this year for coverage on this so far.
One of the things that I'm wondering and seeing how these bills impact the mental health of 2/3 of LGBTQ youth, and just to contextualize for everyone, some of the what we mean by that is that youth are reporting. This is quoting from Orion's piece. Are reporting quote higher stress, anger, sadness, and fear for the future, close quote. That's what 2/3 of LGBTQ youth say that these bills are doing to them, right? Increasing stress, anger, sadness, and fear of the future. Imagine being 13 and being afraid of being able to exist. But one of the things I'm wondering is that I wonder if another reason why youth are so focused on this is that young people pay attention to other young people, right? And one of the things that struck me again in reporting this last year, in a way that still hits heavy on my heart, is the fact that so many of the people that are carrying the burden in states in terms of testifying before state legislatures, in terms of going out and speaking to the press and at rallies, are people who are in there who are anywhere between 9 and 16. That disproportionately the burden for fighting these bills is falling on young people. And I think what outraged me is that I saw it as in some ways you know an incredible failure of adults to protect these children at every level. Whatever is being doing is being insufficient. I'm just going to say it bluntly. I think a lot of national organizations aren't doing enough to support these kids and to support what they need. These adults should be taking on a lot of this fight. And in so many ways, Orion, I mean, it literally was what would happen is that a parent or a child would hear about these bills and they would decide that they were going to go testify. Or Lindsay Hecox, for example, who was 17 at the time, um, in in uh, in oh my God, is South Dakota? I think that's or North Dakota. Oops, I'm forgetting right now. The federal case now on young trans people participating in athletics, just literally heard that she could go testify and wrote out a testimony herself and went before a state legislature committee that was hostile to her, and at 17 decided to testify. That a lot of these responses are because young people and their families are deciding to get involved in the fight. And that's one of the things that's striking me about the pushback from these bills, is that it's falling on young people it's falling on teenagers to do a lot of this work. And I'm wondering how that strikes you and kind of what you read from what you learned from the people that you spoke to for this article.
And definitely, and thank you for talking about this, because the burden you just talked about is happening um, when, especially for like LGBTQ kids, are they just don't have enough resources already, like outside of these bills.
Hmm.
Because the Terror Project Morning Consult, they found that trans kids are reporting significant challenges to accessing mental and physical health care during the pandemic. So they have this high rate of poor mental health. They also just can't get care for it. And that's happening as they're paying attention to these bills, as they're, like you just said in your example with Lindsay, as they're debating, like, should I speak publicly about this? Should I instead of living my life privately, should I go get on a stage and like talk to lawmakers? Which honestly, I would not have done that when I was a young trans teen. I did not like want anyone to talk to me about this. Um, so that's a big decision. Like that's an incredibly brave decision to do when you're young and trans and you probably just want to like live your life. And that's also happening as LGBTQ youth are saying in the Morning Consult Trevor Project poll, they just don't have enough money. Half of them were stressed about not having enough money. 19% said they at some point hadn't had enough food during the pandemic. So the burden you're talking about is happening like in the context of LGBTQ kids just don't have enough resources. Point blank is what's most striking to me.
Yeah, and I mean, also looking at your article, it's really important that the burden is falling on the people who have the least resources in terms of being able to carry it. You cite uh, the way in which the pandemic has impacted uh, young trans people, young queer youth. Uh, in the following ways, that homelessness and food scarcity and other needs have only gotten worse during the pandemic. And so, as you say, I mean, that's also the thing that also struck me when I was thinking about these bills is that, during the middle of a pandemic, um, what the right got focused on was anti-trans bills targeting youth. Like I don't know how you arrive at that. That's not logical. But that was the response. And so during this, people have to kind of confront these issues. I wanted to just let people know that we will have time for maybe one or two questions. So if any of you have ideas or contributions that you wanted to bring forth or questions, please think about those now. I'm going to ask another question, and then probably at the end of that, see if any of you have those before we let Orion go back to doing his day job. Um, so you did say, we want to try to find ways, or you intimated that we want to try to find ways to lessen the blow of this conversation on young people, and on their mental health. And I'm wondering what you heard, or what you came to in your reporting in terms of the ways that we can do that. What are the ways that we can both, lessen the blow of this conversation on young people, and what are some of the ways and resources that we can help young people cope? Because as we know, this is an election year. These dozens of these bills have already been introduced. It's going to gain steam for another year, and probably will increase every year through 2024, because this is a part of the right wing electoral strategy, along with critical race theory and voting rights, suppression of voting rights, to sweep to victory. So I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that we can help young people through this?
Well, thank you so much for thinking of this. I definitely think sharing resources when we can in stories, which is like a simple thing to do, but I think if like in the story I did recently on trans poverty, like we talk about these negative issues, but if we can include like where they can go for more information to make people feel empowered, like if they're reading our story, they want information. So if we can like direct them to more places to learn if they want to because like I don't like we're covering this, but there's more places for them to go to learn. They don't have to just be like, oh, like the worst is happening and I there's nothing I can do about it. There's advocates they can work with if they want to do that. They can speak publicly if they want to do that. I think what I would want to avoid is making people feel like defeated. Like, if you're like, you can take action if you want to do that. And I also think, as we're reporting on this, and this is something Kate talks a lot, my colleague Kate Sozin, who's excellent, talks a lot about, is trying to cover our community as a whole also means not just covering like what people see as the bad things
Mm-hmm.
to cover the wins or the successes or like what like it what's positive because we have to include the full story. So I think if we can include more of those stories and that can help people long term to see like there is progress, overall. So I think those would be the two key things.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's one of the reasons why, kind of, in the work of Translash as well, we really work through the podcast and zine and a whole bunch of other ways to have trans people be able to talk to other trans people about our and the wider world about our just humanity. I'm an artist. I'm a dreamer. Um, you know, I did struggle in my youth, and now I've made it. I think all those stories of possibility and of triumph are really important for young people, as they go through this, unfair, and uncertain time. I just wanted to let people know that if you have questions, to kind of raise your hand or make yourself known at this point, or comments. As you maybe think about that, I just wanted to let you know that if you enjoy the conversations today, one, continue to look out for Trans Mike. We do this once a week on Twitter Spaces. And also, the Translash podcast, which I host, is debuting today. In terms of its first 2022 show, we're looking at the Biden administration 1 year on. So I encourage you to listen to that. And of course, hopefully you're following Orion and the 19th, and his colleague Kate, as they continue to report on trans issues. So I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts or questions for Orion, or on this topic right now. Also, to let you know that you can also share this conversation if there are those whom you think could benefit from what we spoke about today. This conversation is being recorded and immediately will be available on my timeline, to be able to share with your colleagues or with other people that are focused on helping young people through this really difficult moment. I'm gonna give it just one more sec in case anyone does. Um, I just wanted to say that one of the things that always strikes me is that, I hate the word resilience, because it seems as if people bounce back from things, but I guess the ability of queer kids to work through the pain. Um, you know, there was one kid who we featured last year, Finn, uh, in Alabama, and at one point, you know, broke down and was like, "I'm just a kid, and I shouldn't have to be doing this, and isn't my job at age 16. I'm just turned 16 to be involved in this fight." But then at the end. His mom asked, if you had to do it again, and if it helped other kids, would you do so? Whew, I'm getting choked up. Whew. And he said, probably so. And I think I'm just struck by, the ability of queer youth to continue to be brave in this moment, and it's something that I think we should recognize. There don't seem to be any other questions, I'm wondering, or comments. I'm wondering, Orion, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap?
And definitely, I really appreciate what you just brought up, Amara, about like what we expect from kids right now. I would say, like in my reporting, I think something that's come up is some trans kids just don't want to talk to media about this. Like their parents may be like activists, like they want to be in this space, they want to be public, and their kid may be publicly trans, but that kid may just not want to talk to media. And that's something I'd really want, especially cisgender allies, to think about. Like as you like talk to trans people, as you meet them, like not every trans person like wants to be an activist or an advocate. They may just not want to talk about this stuff. So I definitely encourage like learning what you can learn, and just not expecting that from every trans person, especially the young ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, approaching these conversations with utmost respect and realizing that trans youth are going through everything else that young people are going through, in addition to being trans, in addition to being under resourced in all the ways. Orion, thank you so much for your reporting. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I think this is a really critical topic. I look forward to all of the things that you're going to be working on with respect to school boards, and hope that we can have a conversation about that as it continues. And I'm just also personally sending you my best. I know that sometimes to be trans and to be reporting on these issues and in the middle of the storm with regards to what's happening right now can be very heavy and difficult. And I'm just sending you my best. And, in those moments where it becomes hard, you're not alone. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amar. That really means a lot. I appreciate it. And y'all's work is amazing, and everybody should check out uh, the Trans Hate Machine the series that y'all put out. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Y'all can do that by going to translash.org. There's a podcast drop down. There's actually an anti trans hate machine resource page, which not only links to all of the episodes, but also the transcripts for researchers. And we have infographics there and other articles that were done as a result of that work. So that's also all there at translash.org. Thank you all so much, everyone, for joining today for this critical conversation. And take good care of yourselves as you move through these really upside down, painful, and uncertain times. I'm sending you the best. Have a great day, y'all.
Thanks so much, Amar. You too.
Thank you.